What would you do if you paid for the most exclusive seat on a plane, only to be told you didn't belong there? Imagine being asked to give up your place not because of a mistake, not because of policy, but because someone else thought they looked more deserving. On Flight 726, a quiet evening turned into a storm in the sky. A black woman named Naomi Blake, calm yet unshakable, found herself targeted by entitled passengers and a supervisor who believed loyalty status was worth more than human dignity. But what none of them knew was that Naomi was not just another traveler. She carried a truth powerful enough to shake the airline industry itself. Why did she choose silence when she could have ended it instantly? Why did her refusal to move echo louder than any shout? And how did one confrontation inside a cabin transform into a reckoning that no one on board would ever forget? Stay with us, because this story isn't just about one woman's fight for a seat. It's about all of us, and what dignity really means. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. The low hum of the terminal echoed like a restless tide as travelers moved in every direction, tugging suitcases and adjusting backpacks. JFK's late evening flights always carried a special kind of energy, people rushing to make red-eyes, families returning home, executives preparing for coast-to-coast deals. Amid that swirl of movement, Dr. Naomi Blake walked with steady steps, boarding pass in hand, her posture calm and deliberate. She had spent the past week in New York navigating high-stakes meetings with international partners. Deals worth billions hinged on the kind of composure she carried now. The kind she had learned not only in boardrooms, but in life itself. Yet, what the world never saw were the small, private rituals that steadied her the way she tapped her pen twice before sliding it into her leather notebook. The way she paused at the window to take a single breath before moving forward. Tonight, that composure came with her into the gate area of Flight 726 bound for Los Angeles. Naomi adjusted the strap of her bag, a simple navy satchel that had traveled the world with her. She wore a cream-colored blouse, jeans that looked casual but neat, and shoes chosen for comfort more than appearance. Anyone glancing quickly might mistake her for another tired professional, maybe a professor or consultant, someone hoping for a quiet flight west. What they would not see, unless they looked closely into her eyes, was the weight of responsibility she carried as the CEO of Blake Horizons, a company whose influence stretched across aviation, energy, and technology. When the gate agent announced pre-boarding for first class, Naomi rose with measured grace. She scanned her boarding pass at the podium, hearing the soft chime that confirmed her seat 1A. The number mattered more to her than she liked to admit. In her earliest days, traveling for work, she had sat cramped in economy, pressed against strangers, often treated as if she didn't belong. 1A had once felt like a distant world, reserved for people whose names adorned skyscrapers or whose fathers had built legacies for them. Tonight, as she walked down the jet bridge, she carried the quiet knowledge that she had built her own place there, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. The cabin lights glowed a warm amber as she stepped into first class. Plush seats lined the aisle, each one waiting with its folded blanket and polished glassware. Naomi moved directly to the front, slid into 1A, and placed her notebook carefully on the side table. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She loved these first few minutes before takeoff, the soft murmur of passengers settling in, the muffled clatter of luggage bins closing, the faint hiss of conditioned air flowing through the vents. It was in these moments that she could reflect without interruption. She poured herself a glass of water from the bottle waiting by the seat and opened her notebook. The first page carried an old quote from her mother, written in Naomi's own hand years ago. "Respect yourself first, and the world will learn to follow." As she traced the words with her finger, she remembered being a young girl in Chicago, sitting in the back of a classroom where teachers sometimes overlooked her raised hand. She remembered being told once by a college advisor that her ambitions were a bit unrealistic. And she remembered the first time she entered a corporate lounge where a staff member assumed she was lost. Each moment had left its mark, not as scars, but as reminders. She had promised herself then that when the world questioned her presence, she would answer not with anger, but with undeniable clarity. Now, seated in 1A, she felt that same quiet determination. The seatbelt buckle clicked into place. She glanced out the window at the blinking lights along the tarmac, each one like a signal in the night. She knew the flight ahead would be long, but she welcomed the hours of stillness in the sky. Tomorrow, in Los Angeles, she was scheduled to finalize a contract that could redefine sustainable aviation technology. Tonight, she simply needed rest. A flight attendant passed by, offering a smile. Naomi returned it politely, her mind already drifting toward the calm she hoped for. She sipped her water and leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. The sound of other passengers boarding faded into the background, but just as she felt herself settling, a voice nearby cut through the hum of the cabin. "Excuse me," the voice said, polite, but edged with confidence. Naomi opened her eyes to see a tall woman in a tailored blazer standing at the aisle. She was pale-skinned, her hair pulled into a sleek knot, her posture carrying the unmistakable air of entitlement. In her manicured hand was a boarding pass that she held not toward the flight attendant, but toward Naomi herself. Naomi blinked once, then offered a polite nod. She didn't speak yet. She simply let the moment hang in the air, a pause both delicate and deliberate. The woman smiled thinly. "I believe you're in my seat." Naomi's eyes shifted down to her own boarding pass, resting neatly on the armrest beside her notebook. Seat 1A. The letters were clear. She folded her hands over the card and looked back up, her voice even, soft but certain. "This is 1A," Naomi said, "and it's mine." The hum of the cabin seemed to grow louder as the word settled. A ripple of anticipation moved through the nearby seats. For most travelers, it was just another boarding delay, a minor inconvenience. But for Naomi Blake, it was the beginning of something far larger. She didn't know yet how far this confrontation would go. She didn't know that the seat she occupied would soon become more than a number, more than a piece of fabric in first class. What she did know, with the same clarity that had carried her through boardrooms and barriers, was this: she was not moving. And so the evening flight to Los Angeles began, with a calm voice, a steady gaze, and a storm quietly building above the amber-lit cabin. Claire Whitmore's words lingered in the air as if they had been carefully designed to command attention. Several passengers in the first-class cabin shifted in their seats, their curiosity ignited by the subtle confrontation. Naomi Blake kept her expression composed. She had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than immediate reaction. Claire tilted her head with an air of practiced superiority. She extended her boarding pass again, this time closer, as if its proximity alone might change reality. Naomi did not flinch. She glanced at the pass, then at her own resting on the armrest. The print on both was unmistakable. 2 different names, 1 identical seat number. Before Naomi could reply, a flight attendant appeared. His name tag read Daniel Ross. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that tried to diffuse tension but instead revealed his uncertainty. "Ladies," he said softly. "Is there a seating issue here?" Claire answered before Naomi could speak. "Yes. She's in my seat. I always book 1A. Always. I don't know how this mistake happened, but clearly she should be in another row." Naomi raised her eyes to Daniel, her voice steady, calm, unhurried. "My boarding pass says 1A. I checked in properly. This is my assigned seat." Daniel looked between them, his smile faltering. He leaned slightly toward Naomi, lowering his voice as though trying to coax compliance. "Sometimes there are system errors. Maybe if you wouldn't mind relocating, we can get everyone settled and depart on time." It was a simple suggestion, almost reasonable on its surface. But Naomi felt the familiar sting beneath the words, the implication that her right to the seat was negotiable, that her presence there was somehow conditional, that peace was more important than her dignity. For a brief moment, she considered it. She thought of the hours ahead, the exhaustion already weighing on her shoulders, the temptation of quiet avoidance. If she moved, the confrontation would end quickly. No cameras, no whispers, no eyes boring into her as if waiting for her to prove herself. But another thought followed swiftly. If she moved, she would not simply be switching seats. She would be conceding that entitlement trumped truth, that privilege could dictate reality, that her comfort and her worth were less important than someone else's convenience. She looked at Daniel, then at Claire. "No," Naomi said gently, the single syllable carrying the weight of finality. "This is my seat." Claire's thin smile sharpened. "Do you know who I am?" Naomi did not answer. She had no interest in trading identities like weapons. Daniel shifted uneasily. "Let me get a supervisor," he murmured, already reaching for his radio. As he stepped away, Naomi leaned back in her seat. She could feel her pulse quicken, but outwardly she remained still. She remembered her mother's voice echoing from years past. "There will be days when the world tries to move you. Stand firm, Naomi. Your dignity is not up for negotiation." The supervisor arrived moments later, striding with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Her name was Linda Crawford, her Navy uniform crisp, her hair pulled tightly back. She smiled politely at Claire, then turned to Naomi with a measured look. "What seems to be the problem?" Linda asked. Claire spoke with confidence, gesturing toward Naomi as if presenting evidence. "She's in my seat. I have status with the airline. I always get 1A. I don't know what went wrong, but this is supposed to be mine." Linda nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Naomi. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass?" Naomi handed it over without hesitation. Linda scanned it quickly, her brow tightening for the briefest second before her professional mask returned. She handed it back. "It does say 1A," she admitted, then added smoothly, "but sometimes mistakes happen with elite reservations. To avoid a delay, would you mind accommodating us by switching to another seat? We have an open one in 3C. Naomi felt the knot tighten in her chest. There it was again, her presence treated as the negotiable variable, her claim to fairness undermined by the pressure of convenience. She breathed in slowly, steadying herself before she spoke. I paid for this seat. I checked in. I followed every rule. I will not move." Linda's smile hardened at the edges. "Dr. Blake, we're asking for your cooperation. It would mean a smoother boarding process for everyone." Naomi studied her carefully. Linda had addressed her by title. She had seen the name on the boarding pass, recognized that Naomi was no ordinary traveler, yet even with that knowledge, Linda's priority was appeasing the entitled passenger rather than honoring the truth. Inside, Naomi's thoughts churned. She hated confrontation. She hated that she was being forced into this position, that her exhaustion could not be met with simple respect. A part of her longed to disappear into quiet compliance, to avoid becoming the subject of whispers and judgmental stares. But another part of her, the part forged through years of silent resilience, knew that giving in would mean more than losing a seat. It would mean reinforcing the very structures she had dedicated her life to challenging. Her gaze returned to Claire, who now stood smugly by, confident in the outcome. Naomi straightened her shoulders. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, but every word rang with resolve. "I am not moving." The cabin seemed to pause. The murmurs hushed. The determination in her tone was undeniable. Claire's eyes narrowed. "This is ridiculous. I'll have your job for this," she snapped at Linda, as though Naomi were an employee rather than a paying customer. Linda raised a hand to calm her. "Please, Ms. Whitmore, let me handle this." She turned back to Naomi, her patience visibly thinning. "If you refuse, we may have no choice but to remove you from the flight." Naomi's fingers brushed over the cover of her notebook, the leather cool under her touch. She remembered her father's words now, spoken long ago at their kitchen table. "Sometimes silence is stronger than shouting. Hold your ground, and let the truth make the noise for you." Her heart pounded, but her voice was calm. "I will not be removed for sitting in the seat I paid for." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Linda's expression. She turned to Daniel, muttered something under her breath, and lifted her radio again. Naomi knew what would come next. Another layer of authority, another test of her resolve. She closed her notebook slowly, set it on her lap, and folded her hands over it. She would not yield. The boarding process outside the cabin continued, the line of passengers stretching down the jet bridge. But here, in this narrow space of polished leather and whispered confrontations, a storm was beginning to gather. Naomi felt it in her bones, the weight of something larger than herself pressing into the night air. She leaned her head back against the seat, exhaling slowly, steadying her heartbeat. She whispered so softly only she could hear it. "Respect is not optional." The cabin was filled with a silence that felt louder than any argument. Naomi sat still, her hands folded neatly on her notebook, her eyes forward, her jaw set. She had chosen her ground, and she was not about to yield it. Claire Whitmore stood beside the seat, fuming, her boarding pass still clutched in her manicured hand as if it were a weapon. Daniel Ross hovered awkwardly near the galley, clearly wishing he could vanish into the shadows, while Supervisor Linda Crawford tightened her grip on her radio. The passengers around them pretended to busy themselves with phones and seat belts, but the truth was obvious. Every eye in the first-class cabin was locked on the unfolding standoff. Naomi felt the weight of those stares. They were watching her, judging, measuring, some sympathetic, some skeptical. She had grown accustomed to such scrutiny in boardrooms and conferences. But here, Trapped in a narrow cabin, it carried a sharper edge. Her chest tightened with the memory of being underestimated so many times before. She thought of her first corporate presentation, when a senior executive had asked her if she was with the catering team. She thought of the countless times she had been asked to justify her presence in spaces where others simply assumed they belonged. And now, even after decades of proving herself, she was still here, fighting for something as simple as a seat. Linda's voice broke the silence. "Dr. Blake, please understand, this isn't personal. We're just trying to keep things orderly so we can depart on time. We'll find you another seat of equal comfort." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her voice steady. "Equal comfort. Seat 1A is the seat I booked. That is equal comfort to nothing else." Claire smirked, emboldened by Linda's words. "Exactly. She can sit anywhere else, just not here." The audacity in Claire's tone made Naomi's stomach clench. She looked at the woman. Really looked at her. The flawless blazer, the expensive jewelry, the air of someone who had always been told yes. Naomi recognized the type immediately. She had seen women like Claire in universities, in corporate offices, on boards, women who believed the world bent to their entitlement. "I will not move," Naomi repeated, more firmly now. Linda's jaw tightened. She turned to Daniel and whispered instructions, then raised her radio again. Naomi noticed her tone had shifted. It was no longer a polite request. It was the voice of someone preparing to enforce compliance. Before Linda could speak, another figure entered the cabin. She strode down the aisle with confidence, her heels clicking against the carpeted floor. Naomi recognized her immediately as one of the last elite passengers to board. Her platinum membership tag gleamed from the strap of her carry-on. She carried herself like someone who had never known denial. "Is there a problem?" the woman asked. Her voice was smooth, cultured, with a trace of irritation at being delayed. Linda's eyes brightened with relief, as if reinforcements had arrived. "Ms. Hensley, thank you for waiting. We're resolving a seating conflict. This passenger refuses to move from 1A. The woman's gaze snapped to Naomi, sharp and dismissive. "That's my usual seat," she said. "I've flown this route every month for years. First row, window. It's practically my office in the sky." Naomi met her stare calmly. "Then you'll know it's a comfortable place to sit. Tonight, it belongs to me." The woman's lips curled. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Naomi felt a weary familiarity with the question. It was always the same demand, framed as a declaration. "Do you know who I am? Do you know my status, my rank, my wealth, my connections?" It was never really a question. It was a command disguised as a challenge. "I know who I am," Naomi replied evenly. The woman blinked, momentarily thrown, but she recovered quickly, stepping closer. "I am Evelyn Grant. I have been a Premier Elite member for 2 decades. I sit in this seat every time. If you had an ounce of decency, you would step aside." Naomi breathed in slowly, willing herself to stay centered. She could feel her heartbeat rise, but her exterior remained composed. Evelyn's words dripped with entitlement, and the sting was not just in their arrogance, but in the unspoken assumption beneath them that Naomi, a black woman, could not possibly be the rightful occupant of such a place. Linda placed a hand on Evelyn's arm as if to calm her, though the gesture also signaled allegiance. "We'll resolve this, Ms. Grant. Please be patient while we persuade her to cooperate." Naomi felt the heat of the words like a spark against her skin. Persuade her to cooperate, as though she were an obstacle, a disruption, a problem to be managed rather than a paying customer with rights. Her eyes drifted to the window for a moment, the runway lights glowing in the distance. She thought of her father again, and the way he used to tell her. Dignity isn't something the world gives you, Naomi. It's something you hold on to no matter what they try to take away. She folded her arms lightly, her notebook still resting in her lap. I am not moving, not for convenience, not for status, not for anyone. Claire huffed loudly, crossing her arms. This is absurd. She's just doing this to make a scene. Naomi turned her gaze to Claire, her voice as calm as ever. If there is a scene, it isn't mine. It's yours. Evelyn's eyes flashed, her voice dropping into a sneer. Women like you don't usually last long in seats like this. You'll understand one day. The words cut deep. Not because Naomi believed them, but because she had heard them before in 1,000 different forms. Women like you. Words that divided, excluded, diminished. Words meant to remind her that no matter how high she climbed, someone would always try to pull her back down. She felt the old anger stir within her, the anger she had spent years learning to master. She did not let it spill over. Instead, she channeled it into clarity. Her reply was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried through the cabin with unmistakable strength. I understand already. Respect is not optional. The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel shuffled nervously near the galley. Linda shifted uncomfortably, and several passengers leaned in closer. Phones discreetly angled. Naomi noticed one young woman across the aisle. Her phone lifted just enough to catch video. Their eyes met briefly, and Naomi gave the faintest nod. If this was to be documented, so be it. Linda exhaled sharply, breaking the stillness. Dr. Blake, I need you to think carefully. If you don't cooperate, this flight may not depart on schedule. You'll inconvenience every single passenger here. Is that really what you want? Naomi studied her carefully. She saw not just an employee trying to manage a situation, but a woman upholding a system that always favored the entitled over the rightful. She could hear the manipulation in the phrasing, shifting the burden onto her shoulders, as if she were responsible for the delay rather than the injustice itself. Her thoughts turned inward once more. She considered what might happen if she gave in. She imagined sitting in row 3C, feeling the weight of defeat pressing against her chest. She imagined Claire and Evelyn smirking with victory, Linda smiling with relief, Daniel moving on as if nothing had happened. And she imagined the message it would send not just to them, but to herself. She knew she could not do it. She would not. Her gaze returned to Linda, her voice firm but calm. If this flight is delayed, it will not be because I refuse to move. It will be because you chose to side with entitlement over truth. Linda's expression hardened. Evelyn gasped softly, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. Claire scoffed and muttered something under her breath. The young woman with the phone lowered it slightly, her eyes wide, her expression somewhere between awe and hope. Naomi straightened in her seat. Her body was tired, her mind weary, but her spirit stood unshaken. She had fought too many battles to let this one slip by, and as the cabin bristled with tension, she sensed that the fight had only just begun. The aisle had grown tense with a kind of electric charge, as if every breath in the cabin carried sparks. Linda Crawford stood near Naomi's seat like a sentinel, her shoulders squared, her voice firm with the confidence of authority. She had dealt with unruly passengers before. She had mediated disputes over overhead bins and last-minute upgrades. But this was different. This was not noise or confusion. This was resistance, quiet, measured, immovable. Naomi sat in 1A with her back straight, her notebook balanced on her lap, her fingers interlaced neatly on its leather cover. Her composure irritated Linda more than shouting ever could. A shouting passenger could be silenced, but a silent one forced you to hear what you did not want to confront. Behind Linda, Evelyn Grant tapped her foot impatiently. Her lips pursed as though the air itself had wronged her. Claire Whitmore had sunk into the aisle seat across from them, her eyes flicking between Naomi and the supervisor like a spectator at a match. Daniel Ross lingered in the galley, unsure whether to help or retreat. Dr. Blake, Linda began again, her voice calm but heavy with condescension. I need you to be reasonable. We're offering you an alternative seat in first class, one with the same amenities, the same comfort. This is not a demotion. It's simply an adjustment. Naomi's voice, when it came, was soft but unwavering. You call it an adjustment. I call it surrendering my right. I booked 1A, I paid for 1A, and I'm sitting in 1A. I don't see the reason for this conversation. A murmur rippled across the cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances. Others kept their eyes down. But Naomi could feel the current of silent judgment moving around her. She knew what some of them were thinking. Why not just move? Why make this harder for everyone? She could almost hear the unspoken words echoing in their minds. She had heard them before in different forms, in classrooms, in meetings, in boardrooms. Don't rock the boat. Don't make trouble. Be grateful for what you're given. Linda drew herself up taller, her arms crossing. You're putting us in a very difficult position. Cooperation is what keeps these flights running smoothly. If every passenger insisted on their own way, we would never get anywhere on time. Naomi felt her jaw tighten. Cooperation. That word always stung. Too often it meant compliance with injustice, silence in the face of insult, complicity in the comfort of others. Cooperation was the polite word for erasure. Her thoughts twisted in on themselves. She had promised herself not to let anger control her, not to let the heat of indignation cloud her judgment. She had built her life on strategy, on clarity, on patience. But patience had limits, and tonight she felt those limits pressing against her ribs like an iron cage. She could move and be done with it. She could sit in 3C, close her eyes, and arrive in Los Angeles with no more drama than a bitter taste in her mouth. But if she did, she would leave a piece of herself behind in this cabin, and pieces lost that way never returned. She remembered once, years ago, walking into a luxury hotel where she had a reservation for the presidential suite. The clerk had smiled thinly, checked her ID twice, and then asked if she was certain she could afford it. She had handed over her black card, silent, unflinching. That moment had seared itself into her memory not because of the insult, but because of the choice. She had stood her ground, and the ground had held. Tonight, she felt the same test rising before her again. Linda leaned closer, her voice lowered but edged with steel. If you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to contact security. You will be removed from the flight. A cold hush fell over the aisle. Claire's lips curved into a smirk. Evelyn straightened, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his radio dangling uselessly from his hand. The young woman with the phone, the one Naomi had noticed earlier, angled her camera more deliberately now. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. She let the threat sink in, removed from the flight. The words carried more weight than they should have. Removed meant humiliated, treated as disorderly, cast out as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a person with a right. Removed meant walking back up the jet bridge under the gaze of dozens of strangers, whispers trailing behind her. Removed meant surrender not only to Claire and Evelyn, but to a system that had always assumed people like her were negotiable. Her mind raced. She thought of her team waiting in Los Angeles, of the contract that needed her signature, of the employees whose livelihoods depended on her success. Could she risk all of that for a seat? Could she risk being stranded, delayed, or worse, branded as difficult by the airline? The stakes felt enormous, and yet at their core, they were devastatingly small. One woman, one seat, one act of defiance. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Linda. If you remove me from this flight, it will not be because I was in the wrong seat. It will be because you chose to protect entitlement over truth. The clarity in her voice startled even herself. It was not anger, not rage, but conviction carved into stone. Linda blinked, her authority challenged in a way she had not expected. This is not about entitlement, Dr. Blake. It's about procedure. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. Then your procedure is broken. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling. Claire gasped audibly. Evelyn scoffed. Daniel looked away, as if ashamed. The young woman with the phone whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath, the camera still fixed on Naomi. For a moment, no one moved. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Naomi felt her heart pound, but she also felt a strange calm wash over her. She had said it. She had named the truth aloud, and no matter what happened next, that truth could not be unsaid. Linda straightened, her face flushing. "I'll need to escalate this further," she said curtly, raising her radio. Naomi sat back, her notebook warm beneath her hands. She thought of the call she could make, the one number that would shift this entire equation. She had hesitated to use it, not wanting to wield her power like a weapon, not wanting to reveal herself just yet. But as she watched Linda preparing to summon security, as she saw Claire's smug satisfaction and Evelyn's simmering entitlement, she realized the moment was coming. She breathed in slowly, steadying herself for what lay ahead. The battle was no longer just about her seat. It was about something larger, something heavier, something that reached far beyond the walls of this cabin. Respect was not optional. The hum of the engines outside the aircraft did little to soften the sting of the confrontation unfolding in the cabin. Passengers shifted in their leather seats, their hushed whispers filling the air like static. Naomi Blake sat in 1A, her body still, her eyes calm, but her heart carried the rhythm of a drumbeat that refused to quiet. Every word spoken against her seemed to echo louder in the confined space, bouncing off the polished walls and reverberating deep inside her chest. Evelyn Grant had taken her place in the conflict with the confidence of someone who had never tasted refusal. Her designer heels clicked against the floor as she stepped closer, her chin raised high, her voice smooth and cutting. "Let's end this nonsense. You've made your point, whoever you are. But it's time to step aside. This seat has always been mine, and tonight is no different." Naomi lifted her gaze, meeting Evelyn's eyes without a trace of flinch. "It's different tonight, because I am here." Evelyn's lips twitched into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Do you even understand the kind of people who sit here? Premier elite members like me have earned this spot. I've flown 500,000 miles with this airline. What have you done?" The words dripped with dismissal, but Naomi felt something else beneath them, fear masquerading as superiority. People like Evelyn thrived on the illusion of control, and any resistance to that illusion rattled them to the core. Claire, still standing in the aisle with her arms folded, laughed under her breath. "She's enjoying this. Don't you see she wants the attention? Probably thinks she can get a free voucher out of it." Naomi turned her head slowly toward Claire, her voice still low and deliberate. "If attention was what I wanted, I would have raised my voice long ago. But dignity doesn't need to shout." The cabin hushed again. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between speaking up and staying silent. 2 rows back, a woman clutched her phone as though debating whether to record or hide it, and in 2B, the young woman Naomi had noticed earlier was openly filming now, her camera tilted with steady hands, her eyes wide. Linda Crawford pressed her lips into a thin line. "Dr. Blake, enough is enough. We have rules, we have procedures. You can either cooperate, or we'll have to escalate further." Naomi leaned back slightly, her notebook still resting in her lap, her thumb brushing the edge of its cover. She heard Linda's words, but she also heard something underneath a plea for compliance, not for justice. She thought again of her employees, of the contracts awaiting her in Los Angeles, of the people whose futures were tied to her decisions. She thought of her late mother, who had taught her that dignity carried consequences, that every stand taken came with a cost. Her mind raced in 2 directions at once. One voice whispered, "Give in. Naomi, take the seat in 3C. End this now. Arrive in Los Angeles quietly, without delay. Protect the bigger mission." But another voice, deeper, firmer, spoke from the marrow of her bones. "If you give in, you teach them that your dignity is negotiable. You teach them that truth is only worth defending when it is convenient." She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled, and opened them again. "You keep using the word cooperate," Naomi said softly, "but what you mean is surrender." Evelyn scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Don't you people ever know when you're beaten?" The phrase cut sharper than any knife. Naomi felt the weight of generations in those words. "Don't you people?" The audacity, the reduction of her identity into a stereotype. A rush of anger surged in her chest, but she held it, contained it, channeled it into resolve. Her face remained still, her tone composed. "I am not beaten," she said. "I am sitting in my rightful seat." Evelyn's eyes flashed with fury. She turned to Linda. "If you don't remove her, I will personally ensure your career here is over. I know people at headquarters. Don't think for a second this will go unnoticed." Linda stiffened at the threat. For a moment, Naomi saw the calculation flicker across her face. The choice between appeasing a powerful customer and defending a rightful passenger. The supervisor's silence spoke louder than words. Claire chimed in again, her voice sharp and mocking. Maybe she printed a fake boarding pass. "Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in 1A? A murmur rippled through the cabin. Naomi caught the sting in those words. not just for herself, but for every unseen face they implied. She straightened her posture, her voice calm but ironclad. I belong wherever I have paid and earned the right to be. Your assumptions don't change the truth. The young woman, filming in 2B, nodded slightly, her lips parting in a whisper Naomi could barely hear. Yes, exactly. Naomi felt her chest tighten again. She could almost hear her father's voice as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. But when silence becomes complicity, speak. The decision weighed on her now. She could continue resisting with words, but she knew the next step Linda would take. Security. The humiliation of being escorted out, the whispers, the judgment, the headlines, or she could make the call she had been holding back, the call that would reveal her position, her influence, her power. She had wanted to be just another passenger tonight, a woman traveling west with nothing more than a boarding pass and a right to a seat. But maybe that was no longer an option. Her thumb brushed over the cover of her notebook again. Inside, between its pages, lay numbers and contracts and strategies, but more importantly, it carried reminders of her purpose. She had written a line there just 2 weeks earlier. What you tolerate today will shape what others endure tomorrow. She exhaled, slow and steady. She looked up at Linda, then at Evelyn, then at Claire. She saw their certainty, their conviction that she would eventually fold. She saw their impatience, their entitlement, their belief that authority would always fall on their side. And she realized the moment had come. She reached calmly into her bag and pulled out her phone. For a second, Linda's face flickered with surprise. Evelyn smirked as if expecting Naomi to call a friend for sympathy. Claire rolled her eyes, but Naomi's fingers moved with precision, dialing a number she knew by heart. She lifted the phone to her ear. When the line clicked and a familiar voice answered, she spoke just 3 words, her voice quiet but resonant enough for those closest to hear. We have trouble. The ripple was immediate. Claire's smirk faltered. Evelyn leaned in with confusion. Linda blinked, her authority momentarily unsettled. Daniel peered out from the galley, sensing a shift he couldn't name. Naomi didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The person on the other end of the line already understood. She had chosen not to wield her power like a shield before, but tonight, forced against the wall of arrogance and injustice, she had unsheathed it. The cabin seemed to lean in collectively, passengers holding their breath, waiting to see what would follow. Naomi sat back in her seat, phone pressed to her ear, her expression calm as stone. She had made her decision. She would not move, and she would not fight this battle alone. Naomi kept the phone pressed to her ear, her voice low but steady, her gaze never leaving Linda Crawford. The cabin air felt heavier now, thick with expectation. Passengers leaned closer without meaning to, ears straining to catch fragments of a conversation they sensed was no ordinary call. The voice on the other end was calm, rich, commanding. "Naomi," Marcus Hale said, "tell me what's happening." She spoke softly, but every syllable carried. "Gate B12, Flight 726. I'm seated in 1A. Supervisor demanding I move. 2 passengers claiming the seat. Threats of removal. Cameras rolling." A pause followed, then Marcus's tone shifted, clipped and precise. "Stay calm. Do not leave your seat. I'll handle the rest." Claire Whitmore laughed, her voice high and derisive. What's that supposed to mean? Is your husband going to come rescue you?" Naomi didn't flinch. She ended the call with a soft, "I'll be waiting," and slid the phone back into her bag. She folded her hands once more over her notebook and turned her gaze out the window, as if nothing had changed, but something had. Evelyn Grant sneered, "Pathetic. Making phone calls like this is going to help you. This is a plane, not a playground." Linda tightened her grip on her radio. "Dr. Blake, this isn't a game. I'm making my final request. Will you move to 3C voluntarily, or must we involve airport security?" The words echoed in Naomi's ears, stark and final, a line drawn in the sand. The threat of humiliation loomed like a shadow ready to swallow her whole. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her strength, reminding herself of who she was, of the weight her very presence carried. Her thoughts twisted into doubt for a fleeting second. Was she doing the right thing? Was this the battle worth choosing? She imagined walking back up the jet bridge under the cameras, the whispers, the accusations of being difficult. She imagined the headlines twisted by bias, unruly passenger refuses to cooperate. A shiver touched her spine. But then she remembered her mother's handwriting in her notebook, the words etched into memory. "Respect yourself first, and the world will learn to follow." She breathed out slowly, letting the words fill her chest with steel. She opened her eyes. "I am not moving," she said. Evelyn's voice sharpened like a blade. "You're humiliating yourself. Do you think this makes you strong? You'll end up thrown out, and everyone here will know exactly why." Claire joined in with a scoff. "She's probably hoping for a lawsuit payout. That's the type, isn't it? Always playing the victim." The cruelty in their words settled over the cabin like poison. A few passengers shook their heads in discomfort, but none spoke. The silence of the crowd felt like another antagonist altogether complicit, watchful, waiting for the outcome without daring to intervene. Naomi felt the anger rising in her chest like a storm, but she would not let it break her surface. Her strength was her control. Her resistance was not in shouting but in refusing to bend. She kept her voice calm, her words deliberate. "I'm not playing the victim. I am a customer who has every right to sit in the seat she purchased, and I will not be bullied out of it." Linda's cheeks flushed. She lifted her radio and pressed the button. "This is Supervisor Crawford on Flight 726. We need security at the gate immediately for a non-compliant passenger." The cabin gasped collectively, the words carrying the weight of finality. The phrase non-compliant passenger had a sting Naomi knew too well. It painted her not as rightful, but as disruptive, not as dignified, but as disorderly. She could feel the tide threatening to sweep her away, and for a moment her resolve trembled. Then, just as Linda began to repeat her request, a second voice crackled through the radio, steady, authoritative, male. "This is Thomas Grant, station manager. Hold position. Do not remove any passengers until reviewed." Linda froze, startled. "Mr. Grant, The voice cut her off. "I'm en route to the gate with duty manager Ross. Delay all further action until I arrive." The supervisor lowered her radio slowly, her confidence shaken. She cast a quick glance at Evelyn and Claire, both of whom looked bewildered. Naomi remained still, though inside her chest her heart pounded with relief. Marcus had acted quickly. His presence was already altering the course of events. Evelyn's face twisted with disbelief. What just happened? Why are we delaying for her? Claire muttered. This is ridiculous. She's no one. Naomi turned her head slightly, her voice calm but sharp. If I were no one, the station manager wouldn't be on his way. The silence that followed was different now. Not the silence of passive judgment, but the silence of realization, of suspicion, of dawning curiosity. Whispers began to stir, low but insistent. Who is she? Why is management intervening? Why does she sound so certain Naomi felt the shift too? The balance of power was beginning to tilt, and the truth of who she was hovered like a secret about to break open. She still hadn't revealed it herself, but the moment drew closer with every second. Linda straightened, masking her unease with formality. We'll wait for Mr. Grant. Then, Evelyn groaned. Unbelievable. We're going to sit here and waste time just because this woman refuses to move. My meeting in Los Angeles starts at 10. Do you know how important that is? Naomi let her words hang unanswered. She had no interest in validating Evelyn's self-importance. She turned her gaze back out the window, watching the lights flicker against the tarmac, her reflection faint in the glass. Inside, though, her mind churned. She thought of all the times she had chosen silence, the times she had walked away rather than fight. Tonight she could not. Tonight she was tethered not just to her own dignity, but to every unseen traveler who had been asked to surrender quietly. Her phone buzzed softly in her bag. She pulled it out discreetly and saw Marcus's name flash across the screen. She answered quickly, keeping her tone level. You're secure, Marcus said. Grant and Ross are on their way. Everything is being logged. Do not yield. I won't, Naomi replied. You're not alone in this. Marcus continued. Remember that. She ended the call and placed the phone back into her bag, her hands resting once again on her notebook. Her heart still thundered, but her exterior betrayed nothing but calm. The cabin doors remained open, the jet bridge still connected. The delay stretched on, every minute adding to the tension. Passengers fidgeted, sighed, exchanged looks. Some were clearly frustrated, others intrigued. Naomi could feel their eyes on her, but she did not shrink. She sat in her seat as though it were a throne carved for her, immovable, undeniable. Linda tried once more, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. Dr. Blake, think of the other passengers. Everyone here just wants to get to their destination. Is this worth delaying 100 people? Naomi's reply was soft, but it cut like glass. If 100 people are delayed tonight, it will be because you refuse to honor the truth, not because I refuse to surrender it. The words struck deeper than she expected. Linda faltered, her eyes narrowing, her confidence draining with every second that passed. Evelyn crossed her arms, furious, while Claire muttered insults under her breath. The young woman with the phone kept filming, her lens steady, her gaze unwavering. And, in the midst of it all, Naomi remained unbroken. She could feel the storm building, the climax rushing closer. The call had been made, the reinforcement summoned. All that remained was to see what would happen when truth and entitlement collided head-on. The moment had come. There was no turning back. The hum of the jet bridge carried faint echoes of hurried footsteps, the sound of reinforcements arriving. Naomi remained seated in 1A, her notebook still in her lap, her body calm but her mind alive with anticipation. She had not moved an inch, though her chest tightened with every passing moment. Linda Crawford stood stiffly by the aisle. Her radio clutched like a lifeline. She had been the authority here, but now, with the station manager on his way, her confidence trembled beneath the surface. Evelyn Grant muttered angrily under her breath, checking her watch with exaggerated motions. Claire Whitmore leaned against the seat back across the aisle, her expression smug but fading with uncertainty. Daniel Ross lingered by the galley, clearly wishing he could dissolve into the floor. Then the first figure appeared in the doorway. Thomas Grant, the station manager, stepped into the cabin with a measured stride. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his navy blazer marked with authority. His eyes scanned the cabin quickly, landing on Linda, then Naomi, then Evelyn and Claire. Behind him followed a younger woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard tucked against her chest. Sophia Ross, the duty manager, carried herself with crisp efficiency. The cabin seemed to exhale as they arrived. Passengers shifted in their seats, the whispers rising again. Phones tilted discreetly, recording the scene. Naomi noticed the young woman in 2B still filming steadily, her hands unwavering. Thomas approached Linda first. His voice clipped. Supervisor Crawford. Status. Linda straightened, trying to recover her command. Seat conflict. Passenger in 1A refuses to move despite multiple requests. Non-compliance escalated. I was preparing to call security when you intervened. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Did you verify her boarding pass? Linda hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but we had a double booking issue. Ms. Grant here is Premier Elite. She has priority. The words rang false even as she said them. Thomas's jaw tightened. He extended his hand toward Naomi. May I see your boarding pass? Ma'am. Naomi held his gaze as she placed the card into his hand. Thomas scanned it, then turned toward Sophia. Verify. Sophia tapped swiftly on her tablet. Within seconds, the confirmation tone chimed. Boarding pass valid. Seat 1A assigned to Dr. Naomi Blake. System shows no duplicate issuance. Ms. Grant is booked for 3C. The silence that followed was heavy, almost painful. Evelyn's face flushed crimson. Claire's eyes widened, her smugness collapsing into disbelief. Linda's lips parted as if to protest, then sealed tight when she saw Thomas's glare. Naomi sat still, her composure unbroken. She had known the truth all along, but hearing it spoken aloud carried a power all its own. Thomas returned the boarding pass with deliberate care. Dr. Blake, thank you for your patience. You are rightfully seated in 1A. There has been no mistake on your part. The murmurs surged around the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, some nodding, some whispering in approval. A man in the second row whispered to his wife. So she was right all along. The young woman in 2B caught Naomi's eyes and gave a small smile of encouragement. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice sharp, desperate to reclaim control. I don't care what your system says. I always sit in 1A. Always. You think I'm going to sit in 3C like some nobody? This is outrageous. Thomas's expression hardened. Ms. Grant, your assigned seat is 3C. You may take it or you may deplane. Those are your options. The fury in Evelyn's eyes burned, but beneath it was the unmistakable panic of someone unaccustomed to denial. Claire tried to support her, raising her voice. This is ridiculous. Do you know who she is? She's a loyal customer, worth more to this airline than some woman making trouble. The insult hovered in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. Naomi felt the sting of it, but she didn't flinch. She had lived long enough to recognize the shape of contempt even when it pretended to stumble over words. Thomas turned sharply. Enough. Loyalty does not excuse disrespect. This passenger is in her assigned seat. If you cannot accept that, you are free to leave the aircraft. The firmness in his voice silenced the aisle. For the first time, Naomi saw Evelyn falter, her bravado cracking under the weight of authority that was no longer on her side. Claire's mouth opened as if to argue, then closed again when she saw Sophia watching her with cold precision. Linda shifted uneasily, her authority evaporating. She looked at Thomas, then at Naomi, then back again, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. "I was only trying to avoid a delay," she muttered. Thomas's eyes bore into her. By removing a rightful passenger, by siding with entitlement over procedure, you should know better. Sophia spoke up, her tone sharp and clear. "Mr. Grant, this incident is already being recorded by multiple passengers. It's trending on social platforms. The reputational risk is significant." A ripple of recognition moved through the cabin. Naomi saw several passengers quickly lower their phones, others pretending to check messages, though their cameras were still discreetly running. The truth was spreading already, faster than anyone could contain it. Naomi felt the shift deep in her chest. For the first time that evening, the burden of proof no longer rested on her shoulders alone. The truth had been confirmed, and the power was shifting away from the smug entitlement of Evelyn and Claire, away from Linda's false authority, toward something larger, more undeniable. But she also sensed the danger. When truth emerged so publicly, it never came without backlash. Evelyn's face was a storm brewing. Claire's resentment sharpened into venom, and Linda's pride twisted into anger masked by silence. The battle was not over. Naomi adjusted in her seat, her voice calm but deliberate. "I hope this is a moment we all remember, not because of the inconvenience, but because of what it shows. Respect is not optional." The words rang through the cabin, quiet but unshakable. Some passengers nodded subtly, others looked down, but no one missed the weight of what she had said. Thomas gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Well said. Dr. Blake," he turned to Linda, "we'll be filing a report. Stand down." Linda pressed her lips together, nodding stiffly. She stepped back, her shoulders rigid, her authority stripped bare before the eyes of every passenger. Sophia leaned closer to Thomas, murmuring something Naomi could not hear, then glanced at Naomi with something like respect. Naomi met her eyes briefly and gave a single, steady nod. The storm had shifted, but Naomi knew the skies were not clear yet. She had seen the look in Evelyn's eyes, the bitterness in Claire's smirk, the wounded pride in Linda's rigid posture. The battle for dignity was never a single clash. It was a war of moments, and this was only one of them. Still, as she looked out the window at the glowing runway lights, Naomi felt the faintest flicker of calm. She had not moved, she had not surrendered, and for now, that was enough. The cabin had quieted, but the quiet was not peace. It was the brittle silence of glass under pressure, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Naomi sat in 1A, her hands folded loosely over her notebook, her breathing steady. She had been vindicated. Thomas Grant and Sophia Ross had confirmed her right to the seat, but she knew the battle was not yet finished. Evelyn Grant stood in the aisle as though rooted there, her posture rigid, her face flushed with indignation. The verdict had been handed down, yet her pride would not let her accept it. She glanced around the cabin, as if seeking an audience to validate her outrage, and then fixed her glare on Thomas. "This is unacceptable," she snapped. "I've flown this route for years, and I've always sat in 1A. Always. You don't just strip away loyalty like that. I know executives at headquarters. If this is how you treat your most valued customers, you'll regret it." Thomas met her gaze with unflinching calm. "Ms. Grant, loyalty does not entitle you to another passenger's seat. You are assigned 3C. You may take it, or you may deplane. Those are the only options." A murmur ran through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances. Others whispered under their breath. Naomi caught fragments of words finally standing up. Entitled woman. She's not given up. Claire Whitmore, unwilling to let Evelyn stand alone, leaned forward with a smirk. "This is absurd. That seat should be hers. Look at her. She belongs there, and look at—" She stopped herself, but the unfinished words lingered in the air like smoke. Naomi recognized the shape of the insult, even unspoken. She had lived with its shadow her entire life. Naomi's gaze shifted slowly toward Claire, her voice calm but cutting. "You should finish your thought, or perhaps silence is safer than revealing it." Claire's smirk faltered. Her cheeks flushed. She looked away, but the damage was done. The passengers around them had heard enough to understand. Linda Crawford, still standing stiffly near the galley, shifted her weight. Her authority had been stripped bare, her pride humiliated in front of her staff and her passengers. She clung to the scraps of control left to her, her jaw tight, her eyes narrowed on Naomi as though she were the architect of Linda's downfall. Sophia Ross, sharp-eyed and calm, made a quick note on her clipboard. "Mr. Grant," she said quietly but firmly. "The longer this drags on, the more visibility it gathers. Videos are already circulating. Delay damages reputation more than decisive action." Thomas nodded. He turned back to Evelyn. "Final decision. 3C, or you leave this aircraft. Choose now." Evelyn's lips curled, her pride battling against the reality before her. She looked at Naomi with eyes that burned, as though Naomi's calm presence were a personal attack. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she demanded. Naomi inhaled slowly, then exhaled. She had heard the phrase too many times. It was never really a question. It was always a weapon. She lifted her chin slightly. "I know exactly who you are. A passenger assigned to 3C. A ripple of stifled laughter moved through the cabin, a release of the tension coiled too tightly for too long. Evelyn's face turned crimson. Her hands trembled, though she tried to mask it with a veneer of rage. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you are." Naomi's eyes softened, though her voice carried steel. "Make sure they know I'm a woman who did not move." The words struck the air with quiet force. Several passengers nodded almost instinctively, their expressions shifting from passive observers to subtle allies. The young woman in 2B lowered her phone for a moment, her eyes glistening, her lips pressed together in a faint, determined smile. Thomas gestured firmly toward the aisle. "Ms. Grant, sit down or step off, now." Evelyn held his gaze, then glanced once more at Naomi. The fury in her eyes promised vengeance, but her body betrayed her defeat. With a sharp exhale, she spun on her heel and stormed toward 3C, her heels striking the carpet like gunshots. Claire followed her with a glare thrown in Naomi's direction, muttering under her breath, Naomi caught only fragments words like arrogant and playing the system, but she let them pass without acknowledgement. Some battles were not worth engaging. The cabin seemed to release a collective breath. Passengers shifted, sat straighter, whispered less. The storm had not ended, but the thunder had rolled past for now. Naomi leaned back in her seat, her eyes turning briefly to the window. The runway lights flickered in the distance, steady and patient. Inside. Her chest ached with the adrenaline of the confrontation, but her exterior remained composed. She had held her ground. She had not surrendered. Yet even as the quiet settled, she felt the undercurrent of unfinished business. Linda still simmered, her pride wounded. Claire and Evelyn plotted in their silence, their entitlement bruised but not broken, and she knew the videos already spreading online would carry ripples far beyond this cabin. Her phone buzzed softly again. She opened her bag and read the message on the screen. It was from Marcus Hale. "You're doing fine. Stay steady. They'll know soon." Her breath caught for a moment. They'll know soon. She closed her eyes briefly. She had tried to travel tonight as just another passenger, a woman on her way to Los Angeles, a professional hoping for quiet. But the mask was cracking. The truth of who she was, the weight she carried, the authority she rarely wielded outside boardrooms soon, it would no longer be hidden. When she opened her eyes again, she caught the gaze of the young woman in 2B. The girl raised her phone slightly once more. Recording again. Naomi gave her the faintest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. If the world was watching, let them watch truth. Linda stepped forward suddenly, her voice sharp, brittle. "Dr. Blake, I hope you understand the chaos you've caused tonight. You may think you've won something, but all you've done is inconvenience an entire cabin of passengers." Naomi's voice was quiet but unwavering. "If inconvenience is the price of dignity, I will pay it every time." The cabin fell silent once more. Passengers leaned into the words and their eyes flicking between Naomi and Linda. For the first time, Naomi saw hesitation in Linda's eyes, a flicker of doubt piercing through the anger. But just as quickly, the doubt hardened back into pride. Linda straightened. "We'll see what headquarters thinks of your performance tonight." Naomi's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Yes, we will." The quiet that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken truths. Naomi could feel the balance shifting again, the storm building toward something larger. Her identity had not yet been spoken aloud, but it hung in the air, a question on every passenger's lips. "Who is this woman who refuses to move?" She folded her hands over her notebook, her face calm, her eyes steady. The answer was coming, and when it did, the cabin would never be the same. The air inside the cabin had shifted. What had begun as whispers of disbelief now carried an undercurrent of awe, tinged with speculation. Naomi Blake sat in her rightful seat, 1A, calm as ever, but she could feel the weight of eyes pressing in from all directions. People weren't just watching anymore, they were wondering. Evelyn Grant seethed in 3C, her manicured nails tapping against the armrest in a sharp, angry rhythm. The humiliation of being forced from 1A cut her deeply, and every glance toward Naomi was filled with venom. Claire leaned in beside her, their hushed voices rising above the steady hum of the air system. "She's nobody," Claire whispered fiercely. "I don't care what the system says. She played it somehow." Evelyn's lips curled. "Then we'll play harder. If she thinks this is over, she's mistaken." from 1A. Naomi didn't need to hear the exact words. She could read their body language. The way Evelyn's shoulders shook with restrained rage. The way Claire's eyes darted toward her like daggers. She had faced women like them before in boardrooms, in negotiations, in spaces where silence was expected of her. Entitlement always wore the same expression, no matter the setting. But the difference tonight was that she wasn't hidden in anonymity anymore. The passengers had seen her stand firm, and now they were wondering why she carried herself with such composure. Ordinary people didn't defy supervisors, endure insults, and remain so unflinching. Naomi folded her hands lightly over her notebook again. She could feel her phone vibrate inside her bag, a silent reminder that Marcus Hale was watching from a distance, that reinforcements were moving into place. Still, she had hoped to avoid this. She had wanted to fly unnoticed, to live for one evening as just another traveler. The silence fractured when Evelyn spoke louder, deliberately pitching her voice to carry through the cabin. Unbelievable. This airline is protecting some nobody over their elite customers. Do you realize how much money I've spent with this company? Heads turned. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some frowning at Evelyn, others glancing at Naomi with curiosity. The young woman in 2B raised her phone again, recording openly now. Thomas Grant stepped forward, his patience thinning. "Ms. Grant, enough. We've resolved this matter. Your assigned seat is 3C. The discussion ends here." But Evelyn refused to yield. "Ends here. Hardly. Do you even know who she is?" She jabbed a finger toward Naomi. "Look at her. She's playing you. There's no way she belongs in 1A. This is fraud." The word hung in the air like smoke. Fraud. A deliberate attempt to stain Naomi's dignity with suspicion. Naomi lifted her gaze slowly, meeting Evelyn's eyes. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but carried an edge of warning. "Be careful with your words." Evelyn scoffed. "Or what, you'll have me removed, please. I know how this works. You don't belong here, and when this is over, everyone will know it." The murmur among passengers rose again. Questions whispered from row to row. Who is she? Why won't she move? Why is management protecting her Linda? Desperate to salvage her pride, step back into the fray. "Mr. Grant, maybe we should verify her credentials beyond just a boarding pass. If there's even a chance of fraud, we can't risk liability." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Supervisor Crawford, we've already verified the system. The boarding pass is valid. That's enough. But Sophia Ross, ever sharp, raised an eyebrow. Unless Dr. Blake would like to clarify matters herself." The words were careful, not accusatory, but Naomi heard their weight. The unspoken question pressed against her. "Who are you really?" Her pulse quickened. She had not planned to reveal her identity tonight. She had wanted dignity to stand on its own, without the crutch of power, but she felt the walls closing in the threats from Evelyn, the insinuations from Linda, the whispers of the passengers. The truth was going to surface whether she spoke it or not. Naomi inhaled slowly, her voice steady. "I have nothing to clarify. My boarding pass is my credential. That is all that should be required of any passenger." For a moment, silence reclaimed the cabin. Some passengers nodded in agreement, others still whispered, their curiosity unsatisfied. Evelyn's smirk widened as if sensing an opening. "She won't answer because she can't." Evelyn said, louder now, ensuring the whole cabin heard, "She's a fraud, pretending to be someone she's not, and the airline is letting her get away with it." Claire chimed in, emboldened. You're all being duped. Mark my words, you'll regret protecting her. The young woman in 2B, emboldened by the injustice, spoke for the first time. Her voice shook slightly, but it carried. She's not a fraud. She's the only one here acting with dignity. The cabin gasped softly at the intrusion. Evelyn spun toward her, eyes flashing. Stay out of this. You don't know what you're talking about. But the young woman held her phone steady, her hands firm now. I know exactly what I'm talking about. The world's watching, and they'll see who's right. Naomi felt something stir deep inside her. The support of one stranger, small though it was, mattered more than Evelyn's threats or Linda's bitterness. She met the girl's eyes briefly and offered a faint nod of gratitude. The tension thickened. Naomi knew she could end this in a single sentence. She could reveal her name fully, her position, the authority that Marcus Hale and others already understood. She could silence Evelyn, dismantle Linda's insinuations, satisfy the whispers of every passenger. But she hesitated. She had fought so hard for dignity to stand on its own, unchained from titles or wealth. If she revealed herself now, would the lesson be lost? Would it seem as though respect belonged only to those with power? Her thoughts churned, torn between her principles and the reality of the moment. She thought of her late father, who had always told her, when the truth matters, let it breathe in its own time. You'll know when to speak. And as she looked around the cabin at Evelyn's venom, Linda's simmering pride, Claire's bitterness, and the passengers leaning forward, hungry for answers, Naomi knew the moment was coming. Not tonight, perhaps not in this instant, but soon. The truth would have to be spoken. For now, she remained still, calm, unyielding. I will not move, she repeated softly, but her words carried through the cabin like a chord struck in perfect pitch. The hush that followed was no longer brittle, but reverent. For the first time, Naomi sensed that the tide was turning, that dignity itself had begun to claim the space around her. But Evelyn's eyes promised the storm was not over. The silence in the cabin grew heavier with every passing second. Naomi Blake sat unmoved in 1A, her gaze steady, her hands resting lightly on her notebook. Around her, passengers shifted in their seats, leaning forward as though waiting for a curtain to rise on the next act of a play. They weren't just watching anymore, they were holding their breath. Evelyn Grant's voice, shrill with indignation, broke the stillness. Fraud. That's what this is. She's pretending. And you're all falling for it. She jabbed a finger in Naomi's direction, her anger echoing through the cabin like a drumbeat. If the airline won't expose her, I will. Claire Whitmore added fuel, her smirk thin but sharp. She can't even say who she is. If she really belonged in that seat, she would have said it by now. Naomi's chest rose and fell with a quiet rhythm. She had hoped to avoid this moment. She had wanted her dignity to stand on its own, untethered to her wealth or her titles. But she could feel the storm pressing in on her from all sides, threatening to drown her in suspicion. If she remained silent, Evelyn's poison would spread unchecked. If she spoke, she risked shifting the lesson from dignity to status. Her phone buzzed softly again. She pulled it from her bag and glanced at the screen. A single message from Marcus Hale. It's time. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled and exhaled. Then she stood. The cabin hushed instantly, the atmosphere electric. Naomi held her notebook at her side and looked slowly from face to face, letting the silence stretch until every eye was fixed on her. "My name," she began, her voice calm but resonant, "is Dr. Naomi Blake." She paused, her gaze sweeping the cabin. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Blake Horizons. Some of you may not know the name, but I assure you your airline does. We design, supply, and maintain systems that keep half this fleet in the sky." The words struck like lightning. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A man in row 4 lowered his phone in stunned silence. The young woman in 2B pressed her hand to her mouth, her recording now capturing history. Even Thomas Grant's eyes widened, though only slightly. Sophia Ross blinked once, then nodded almost imperceptibly, as though a puzzle had clicked into place. Naomi continued, her tone unwavering. "I boarded this flight tonight as a paying customer, in my assigned seat, with no expectation of recognition. I wanted to travel as any other passenger does. Instead, I was profiled, dismissed, and told to surrender my seat to someone deemed more fitting. And when I refused, I was threatened with removal." Her voice didn't rise, but its power filled every corner of the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, transfixed. Even the engines outside seemed to fade into silence. Naomi's gaze shifted deliberately to Evelyn. "You wanted to know who I am. Now you do, and perhaps now you'll understand why dignity is not negotiable. Not for me, not for anyone." Evelyn's face blanched, her fury collapsing under the weight of truth. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. Claire's smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Linda Crawford swallowed hard, her authority crumbling into dust. "Dr. Blake," but Naomi cut her off gently, her tone firm but not cruel. "No, you've said enough tonight." The murmurs swelled again, but this time they carried a different tone: admiration, astonishment, even shame. A man across the aisle whispered, "She's the CEO." His wife nodded, her eyes fixed on Naomi with newfound respect. The young woman in 2B lowered her phone slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The world needs to hear this." Naomi turned her attention back to the passengers, her voice softening but gaining depth. "Understand this clearly. What happened here tonight isn't about me being a CEO. It's about a woman, a customer, a human being, told she did not belong in the seat she rightfully purchased. The only difference is that I have the power to make sure this moment is not forgotten." The words washed over the cabin like a wave. Some passengers bowed their heads, others nodded slowly, their expressions heavy with thought. Thomas Grant cleared his throat, his professional composure cracking for the first time into something like awe. "Dr. Blake, on behalf of the airline, I deeply regret what has transpired." Naomi inclined her head slightly, acknowledging but not absolving. Regret is a start. Accountability is better. Evelyn found her voice at last, though it trembled. "You think this makes you noble? Flaunting your power?" Naomi's eyes softened, but her voice carried iron. "My power doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from refusing to bow when I am told to kneel. That is what you've witnessed tonight." A hush fell again, deeper this time, reverent. Naomi sat back down in 1A, her movements calm, unhurried. She placed her notebook on the side table once more and folded her hands over it, as if to mark the end of a chapter. Sophia Ross spoke quietly to Thomas. "We need to escalate this to headquarters immediately. The optics, the consequences." Thomas nodded grimly, his eyes never leaving Naomi. Linda stood frozen, her face pale, her lips pressed tight. She had pushed, insisted, and nearly unleashed disaster. Now she stood exposed, her authority in tatters. Evelyn slumped back in 3C, her fury hollow. Claire crossed her arms, staring at the floor. The power they had wielded so carelessly just minutes before was gone, swept away by a truth too strong to deny. Naomi, though, felt no triumph. She felt only the weight of what had just happened, the burden of knowing her dignity had needed her title to be defended. It was a bittersweet victory, and the bitterness lingered. She glanced once more at the young woman in 2B, who still held her phone, eyes wide with conviction. Their gazes met, and Naomi offered a faint nod. If the world was watching, let them see not just power but principle. The aircraft cabin, once a stage for humiliation, had become something else entirely, a reckoning, and Naomi knew the true battle was only just beginning. The cabin seemed to tremble under the weight of revelation. Naomi Blake sat again in 1A, but she no longer looked like just another passenger. The knowledge of who she was rippled through the rows like a shockwave. Eyes widened, phones lifted, whispers burned into the hum of the air system. Evelyn Grant sat in 3C, rigid as stone, her face red and twisted with fury. She had been stripped of her imagined superiority, and her pride clawed desperately for any foothold. She turned suddenly, her voice rising above the quiet murmur. "So this is it. You're all just going to bow to her because she's rich, because she's powerful." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "What about the rest of us? What about loyalty? What about customers like me who actually matter to this airline?" The words cracked through the cabin, but they did not land as Evelyn hoped. Instead of nods, she was met with silence, with the stares of passengers who now saw entitlement for what it was. Naomi turned her head slowly toward her, her voice calm, deliberate. "You still don't understand. This was never about money. It was never about titles. It was about respect. You thought you could take mine because you assumed I had none. And now you resent me because the truth forced you to see otherwise." The hush deepened. Evelyn's lips trembled, but no reply came. Linda Crawford stepped forward, desperate to salvage her unraveling authority. Her voice was tight, almost pleading. "Dr. Blake, with all due respect, if you had simply identified yourself earlier, none of this would have happened. We could have avoided Naomi's eyes cut to her, sharp enough to slice through the veneer of apology. Avoided what? The truth. The humiliation that came not from me, but from your choices." Linda swallowed, her face pale. "It's procedure," Naomi said softly. "It's not a shield for prejudice. It is not a script for cruelty." The cabin shifted with those words, as though every passenger felt their truth. Thomas Grant lowered his head slightly, acknowledging the point. Sophia Ross scribbled furiously on her clipboard, her eyes darting toward Linda with something that looked almost like contempt. The young woman in 2B spoke up again, emboldened now. "She's right. I've been recording this whole time, and the world's going to see exactly how this went down. Every word." Linda's face drained of color. "Recording." "Yes," Sophia interrupted firmly, "and from the looks of it, dozens of passengers are. This is no longer a private dispute. It's already public." As if to punctuate her words, a man in row 4 muttered, "I just posted the clip. Already has comments." Phones glowed in the dim cabin light, proof that the story was already spreading beyond the walls of the plane. Thomas lifted his radio, his tone crisp. "Control, patch me through to headquarters." A crackle, then a pause. Within moments, a new voice filled the radio, amplified just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is Margaret Lane, Chief Operating Officer." "Go ahead." "Thomas." Naomi's lips curved faintly. The name was familiar. Margaret Lane was one of the senior executives she had negotiated with months earlier over aircraft contracts. Naomi said nothing, but the mere presence of that voice seemed to electrify the atmosphere. Thomas spoke quickly. "We have an incident on Flight 726. Passenger doctor. Naomi Blake was challenged for her seat by both crew and other passengers. Verified ticket confirmed her right to 1A. Escalation occurred. Situation is now being recorded widely. Requesting direction." The silence on the other end lasted a beat too long. Then Margaret's voice returned, sharper. "Naomi Blake. Our Naomi Blake." "Yes, ma'am," Thomas confirmed. A heavy pause. "Do not let this escalate further. Dr. Blake is not just a passenger. She's one of our largest partners. I will call the CEO directly. Stand by." The cabin stirred with awe. Some passengers gasped. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. The whispers swelled louder, threading from row to row. "She's a partner with the airline. She knows the CEO. She runs Blake Horizons." Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, her rage boiling over into panic. Claire's face drained, her smugness replaced by fear. Naomi remained composed, though inside her chest her heart beat like a drum. She had not wanted to invoke her influence, but the veil was gone now, stripped away by Evelyn's venom and Linda's desperation. The truth was alive in the air, undeniable. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady, measured. "I don't want special treatment. I never did. What I demand is that this airline and every person representing it understand that respect is not optional. Not for me. Not for anyone." The passengers listened, spellbound. A man in business attire nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with reflection. A mother, clutching her toddler, whispered, "She's right." The young woman in 2B wiped her eyes discreetly but kept recording. Thomas lowered his radio. "Headquarters is on alert. The CEO has been notified." Sophia glanced at Naomi, her gaze respectful now. "Dr. Blake, I assure you this will not be ignored. There will be consequences." Naomi studied her carefully. Consequences must reach the root, not just the leaves. Sophia's brow furrowed, but she nodded. Evelyn could take no more. She surged to her feet, her voice breaking into shrill desperation. "You think you've won because you embarrassed me, because you paraded your power. You've ruined this flight, and you've made a fool of all of us." Naomi rose too, not hurriedly, but with a calm that only deepened Evelyn's rage. She faced her fully, her voice soft yet thunderous in its clarity. "No, Evelyn, I didn't make a fool of you. You did that yourself. I simply refused to join you in it." The blow landed without force, yet it crushed Evelyn's pride like glass underfoot. She sank back into her seat, her eyes wet, her fury collapsing into silence. Naomi turned back to the passengers, her voice carrying not only authority but compassion. "What you've seen tonight is not just my story. It's the story of countless travelers who are told they don't belong, who are asked to move, who are treated as less. Most don't have the chance to push back. Most don't have a voice that carries beyond these walls. But you all witnessed it. And now, Perhaps you will remember. The cabin felt transformed. No longer just a metal tube ferrying people across the sky, but a crucible of truth. Even the children had gone quiet, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. Naomi sat once more, her notebook on her lap, her hands resting lightly on its cover. She felt the exhaustion settling in now, the weight of the confrontation pressing against her shoulders. But beneath it was something stronger resolve, steady as stone. She had not bowed, and that mattered. The cabin of Flight 726 was no longer just a vessel in motion. It had become a tribunal in the sky. Every passenger sat upright, attentive, their earlier distractions magazines, headphones, cocktails forgotten. Phones glowed in dozens of hands, recording, streaming, capturing history as it unfolded 30,000 feet above the ground. Naomi Blake sat in Wanee, poised, her notebook resting like a stone anchor in her lap. The storm had reached its peak, and she could feel its weight pressing down. Evelyn Grant sat deflated in 3C, her face pale, her fury burned out. Claire Whitmore avoided every eye, shrinking into herself. Linda Crawford stood stiff near the galley, her lips tight, her pride dangling by a fraying thread. Then Thomas Grant's radio crackled again. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. He raised it to his ear, but the voice that came through was loud enough for the nearby Rose to hear. "This is Richard Cole, Chief Executive Officer. Thomas, put me on speaker." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The CEO himself. Passengers leaned in, holding their breath, phones raised higher. Thomas hesitated only a second before pressing the button. The metallic voice filled the cabin, steady, commanding. "Dr. Blake, are you with us?" Naomi lifted her chin. "I am." "Good," Cole said. "First, let me say what should never have needed saying. You are owed an apology. Not because of your position, but because you are a human being, a customer, and you were disrespected." The words hung heavy in the air. Naomi remained silent, waiting. Cole continued, "I've been briefed by Margaret Lane. Videos are already circulating. This is unacceptable. Effective immediately. Supervisor Linda Crawford. You're relieved of duty pending termination review. You failed in your role tonight, and you misrepresented this company's values." The gasp was audible. Linda's face went white, her mouth opening as if to protest, but the words died in her throat. She stared at Naomi with something between hatred and despair. Cole's voice pressed on. "As for the passengers who instigated this, Ms. Grant, Ms. Whitmore, you are hereby banned from flying with this airline for life. Your loyalty status is revoked. Security will meet you upon landing." Evelyn jolted upright, her voice cracking. "What? You can't." But the weight of his authority crushed her words. Claire buried her face in her hands, trembling. Naomi remained composed, her hands folded neatly on her notebook. Yet she felt no triumph, only the solemn heaviness of justice being served. Cole's tone softened. "Dr. Blake, I can't undo what you endured, but I can promise this effective tomorrow. We will announce sweeping reforms, mandatory anti-bias training for all frontline staff, an independent passenger dignity hotline, transparent accountability reports, and I will personally invite you to help us design these changes, should you choose to." The cabin stirred, murmurs rose, but this time they carried not shock but admiration. The passengers were witnessing something rare power bending toward justice in real time. Naomi inhaled, then spoke, her voice calm, deliberate. "Mr. Cole, I appreciate your words, but understand this reform is not charity. It is responsibility. Tonight is not just about me. It is about every passenger who has been silenced, humiliated, or dismissed without a voice. If you want true reform, it must reach beyond this cabin, beyond this airline. It must ripple outward." The silence that followed was reverent. Cole's voice returned, quieter but resolute. "Then let it ripple. You have my commitment." Naomi gave a single nod, then lowered her eyes to her notebook. The line she had written weeks earlier returned to her mind. "What you tolerate today will shape what others endure tomorrow." Tonight, those words had come alive. The radio clicked off. The connection was gone, but its echo lingered. Sophia Ross broke the silence, her tone steady but tinged with awe. "You've changed the course of this airline tonight. Dr. Blake." Naomi looked up at her, her expression calm. "I didn't change it. Truth did. I simply refused to move out of its way." The words struck deep. Some passengers bowed their heads. Others whispered them under their breath, already repeating them as though they were scripture. The young woman in 2B wiped her cheeks, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never forget this. None of us will." Naomi's eyes softened. "Then let it mean something. Carry it forward. Don't let silence become complicity." The plane seemed to exhale as if releasing the last of its tension. Passengers leaned back in their seats, their faces thoughtful, subdued. Some smiled faintly toward Naomi, others simply nodded in quiet respect. Evelyn sat hollow, staring at nothing. Claire rocked gently in her seat, her hands covering her face. Linda stood like a statue, stripped of authority, her radio limp at her side. The power they had clutched so fiercely was gone, scattered like ashes. Naomi looked once more out the window. The night sky stretched endlessly, stars scattered like distant promises. She felt tired, yes, but also resolute. Tonight had not been about winning. It had been about standing. And in standing, she had reminded everyone what dignity truly meant. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, strained but professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly. We appreciate your cooperation." But the passengers knew the real flight had already taken place. It wasn't in the air. It was here, in this cabin, in the confrontation that had laid bare prejudice and demanded accountability. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Naomi closed her notebook gently, resting her hands atop it. The fight was not over. There would be headlines, interviews, reforms to shape, but tonight she had done what mattered most. She had not moved, and because she had not moved, the world was already moving. As the engines roared and Flight 726 finally lifted into the night, the real journey had already been taken not across miles, but across hearts. Naomi Blake's refusal to surrender her seat became more than a personal stand. It became a mirror, forcing everyone on board and everyone watching to see the painful truth about prejudice and entitlement. This story leaves us with more than outrage. It leaves us with love for the strength it takes to stay calm under fire, respect for the dignity every human being deserves, and hope that justice can rise even in the most unlikely of places like a crowded airplane cabin. But it also leaves us with a challenge. Will we stand firm when others try to push us aside? Will we demand respect, not only for ourselves but for those who can't speak as loudly? Naomi's words echo still. Respect is not optional. If this story moved you, if it made you think, reflect, or even shed a tear, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. More stories are coming. Stories that challenge, inspire, and demand that we look closer. Because the fight for dignity is not over,